All right, we're on Rockford Reading Daily, episode 39. Episode 39. Continuing reading Citizens, Cops, and Power, Recognizing the Limits of Community by Steve Herbert. On the bottom of page 49. Quote, just disgusting filth, end quote. The taint of transience. Urban residents desire predictable and reliable neighbors. Community is principally about a security that is maximized when one knows one's neighbors, time-space patterns, and feels comfortable asking them for occasional assistance. It is therefore hardly surprising that permanence was valued and transience disapproved. For residents, predictable relations were more likely if their neighbors were residents of long standing. With exposure to one another over time came greater understanding. Residents thus favored homeowners as neighbors. Ownership implied permanence, pride, and care. Owners were said to be more likely to maintain their homes. This increased residents' feelings that the future was predictable. Renters, by contrast, were seen as too transient and too lackadaisical to contribute to a collective sense of ontological security. This was expressed most colorfully by Carrie, a Midlands resident. Carrie. Yeah. Oh yeah. You can look at our yards. The people that own and care take care of our yards. You could tell. And I'm not saying we go into each other's houses every time something goes on, but if you do go into one of our houses, you'll see we care. It's picked up, it's cleaned up. You go into a renter's house, it's just disgusting filth. Just disgusting. Hal, a renter himself, residing in Centralia, expressed much the same sentiment. Interviewer. How would you say this neighborhood is different from the ones right around it? Hal. Well, if you went across blank street name and got further over in that area, they're homeowners. And it's a lot more pride in there, you know. Over here, there's no pride in nothing. Property ownership is connected to ontological security. The commitment people make to their homes implies a broader commitment to locale. Renters lack any such commitment and thus were seen by respondents as culturally suspect and politically unreliable. If a neighborhood consisted of mostly owner-occupied homes, its cohesion and predictability were maximized. By contrast, a neighborhood with many rentals was undesirable. Renters were understood as unconnected to place. Just passing through, they could not help glue a community together. By extension, neither could they be expected to join in any neighborhood efforts oriented toward political ends. Hal, a resident of one Centralia neighborhood dominated by multifamily housing, was asked to describe the sense of community in his neighborhood. Hal. Well, what community? I mean, who do you got? You've got neighborhood leaders, and he's good when he's here, but when he's not, it's just so, what do we do now? It's that way. There is no, quote, yeah, we'll handle it, end quote. There's no community coalition or anything. There is a few people, but with a few people going out of it, it doesn't work. And none of us renters are involved in it. Interviewer. None of the renters? How? No. I mean, why should we be? Because we're renters. Why should we be involved in anything? We're paying these people to live here. It's not like we own any of this. There's no pride in renting something. Renters, it is commonly believed, care about neither their property nor their neighborhood. They cannot be relied upon for political muscle. This was noted not just by homeowners, but as the above quote illustrates, by renters themselves. This was even more eloquently expressed by an East Side teenager, Roland, an unusually articulate analyst of the conditions of his community and his role in it. Roland. In a nicer world, I would be responsible for keeping my neighborhood clean, which I do, trying to keep it safe, which I don't, and trying to give back to the community by helping, like weed or do things without an ulterior motive. Now, the fact is this. I'm just like everybody else. I go to school, I study, I go to work, I do everything I feel like I should be doing to be successful. And as soon as I get enough money, or as soon as the opportunity presents itself, I'm out of here. So this isn't exactly like my number one choice for being here. So I'm not exactly the right person to be talking about who should be doing something for the community. Interviewer. So, because you feel that way, are you saying that keeps you from investing in the neighborhood? Roland. Yeah, I wouldn't. You don't want to invest in a car that you know is going to break down sooner or later. Sooner or later, I'm going to be leaving, so I'm not going to put money into it. I'm not going to put in my time. I don't know. It makes me feel like a sucker, but, that's just the way it is. Given the hegemonic notion that renters are disconnected from place, it is unsurprising to learn that they sometimes were ignored in efforts to mobilize community, particularly around issues of crime. Chloe, a West Side resident, said, well, I know the block watch captain. Maybe this is policy, but he does the roster, and he has all the names and phone numbers of the owners so that you can call each other if someone is prowling your car or whatever. And he said that the way it stands, we don't do the rental people. And I don't know if that's for security reasons, because they kind of come and go, or I'm not really sure. They do come and go. So, yeah, and we just don't know them as well. They kind of keep to themselves. I think they're not as plugged into that sense of community as the rest of us are as homeowners. Home ownership thus assumes a political significance, an indicator of the commitment that makes cohesion possible. Those without that status are not political equals because they presumably cannot forge a minimal degree of connection. For non-renters and renters alike, property ownership was an important marker. It follows that neighborhoods with a disproportionate share of renters would understand themselves as less able to mobilize politically. This puts such neighbors at a significant disadvantage when political projects are devolved to lower spatial scales. These communities in greatest need of organizing are the least able to accomplish it. Okay, and then that brings us to the end of that passage and to the beginning of another passage. The main things I got from that is, again, sort of some of the difficulties and some of the hindrances in turning neighborhoods or turning locales into communities. And one of the things that was pointed out before is before we were reading about renters and renters opposed to owners was the heterogeneity of neighborhoods and how that was a difficulty, and how different multiple cultures being in one neighborhood or being in one locale pose roadblocks for turning that neighborhood or locale into a community, and how usually it is in lower class neighborhoods or working class neighborhoods that you would have more heterogeneity and you would have more cultures in one specific area. And that same issue presents itself here in the problem with transience and with the problem with renters as opposed to owners, is that most places where there will be predominantly people renting homes or renting places to stay at in a locale or in a neighborhood is going to be in working class and lower class communities. So not only will you have the problem of transience in some of these neighborhoods and some of these locales, but you'll also have the problem of heterogeneity. And so, again, we're just going through and learning the hindrances to turning neighborhoods and turning locales into community. Hold on one second. Okay. Quote, "It's none of my fucking business," end quote. The constraint of fear. Both casual neighboring and focused political action requires some base level of familiarity and comfort. This comfort is, in turn, contingent upon conditions of security, such that residents can commingle in space. If one experiences the immediate environment as dangerous, one might well withdraw from visibility. This imperils community relations. One's potential vulnerability is heightened further when one raises the stakes and takes concerted action against neighbors suspected of criminal wrongdoing. Suppose a resident believes that drug sales are occurring in the neighborhood and grows frustrated with the ancillary activities often associated with it: excessive traffic, noise, possible violence, and petty thefts. To confront those who appear to be involved is to take a significant risk. One is exposed particularly to the possibility of retaliation, a factor that deters many from acting in the first place. Rob, a Centralia resident, acted anyway, but understood why fear afflicted his neighbors. When discussing his quite visible actions, organizing block walks directly confronting suspected drug dealers, he was asked to contrast himself with his neighbors. Interviewer: Are there other neighbors who wouldn't do anything at all about these problems? Rob: Oh yeah. Interviewer: Why do you think that is? Rob: Fear. Interviewer: Fear of what? Rob: Retribution by the police, or by the drug dealers, or by the landlords, and it all happens, all of the above. You complain too much, and you get in trouble. The belief that complaining led to trouble was commonly cited as an impediment to community building. Given the possibility of danger, better to simply withdraw, a point made clearly by Roland. Asked to describe his responses to wrongdoing that he might witness, Roland said, Roland: If I walk by and see something which I may think to be shady, I'm not just going to run to the nearest phone that I see. Interviewer: Just turn a blind eye to it? Roland: Pretty much, yeah. Like I said, nobody's bothering me, nobody's doing anything to me, it's not my problem. Interviewer: So, why is that? 'Cause you're not looking for trouble? Roland: It's not my concern. It's between the shady person and the shady goings on, and the people who are there who have a problem with it. I'm not saying, let me see. I'm not that callous. If I saw someone getting beat up, I call the police. If I saw something like that happen. If I saw, if I saw someone breaking into a house and I'm across the street by a phone, I will call the police. Let's say if I saw somebody steal a car. I don't know. That's sort of shady. I might just turn a blind eye to that, unless I knew the person with the car. I'm not totally callous, but if there's something where it's not violent and there's not something that I can immediately do, I'm not going to go out minding to it. The possibility that avoidance was the prudent course of action was echoed by Kelly, a middle-aged woman who lived near a home she believed hosted drug dealing. When asked her response to the noise and speeding cars that she associated with the alleged drug sales, she said, Kelly: For a long time I will call the police, but I've had several neighbors tell me it's none of my fucking business, so if it happens in front of their house, I don't see nothing going on. But let it come in front of mine, I'm on the phone. Interviewer: Do you ever go out there and confront somebody? Kelly: No, wouldn't do that. Nope, not in this day and age. I've got kids. I'm going to see them graduate. Interviewer: So it's for fear of what might happen? Kelly: Yep, definite fear, definite. Both Roland and Kelly express a conflicted moral position. On the one hand, each recognizes an obligation to their communities, a recognition that they should respond to criminality. Yet they also recognize the possibility of danger. Better, then, to minimize their individual vulnerability. Fear thus makes it difficult for many to address directly instances of actual or suspected criminality. But it also works to deter casual neighboring outside. Those who live in neighborhoods that they perceive to be unsafe because of activity around locations of suspected drug sales, because of speeding cars, because of occasional physical threats, express reluctance to spend too much time outside. This point was made most eloquently by Carrie, who lives a block away from a residence out of which she believes drugs are sold. The high-speed traffic on her blocks limits her neighborly connections. Kelly: Like I said, my fairy tale would be to live in a cul-de-sac where everybody took care of their yards and the kids got along, and where people were able to play and didn't have to worry about speeding cars. And I know of neighborhoods like that. I've got friends in those kind of neighborhoods. So I guess I envy them because that's what they have. In order to make this a community, we would have to block off the end of a block so the cars can't race, or put in speed bumps or something so people aren't afraid to let their kids cross the street once in a while. I mean, my kids know that once they hit the gate, if they cross it, they're dead meat. Because I've told them and told them and told them, if they ever get hit by a car, there's going to be nothing I can do for them. Nothing. Because they go that fast. So, to make it a better community, I think our little block is a good community. We just don't like the traffic. We don't like the drugs. That's what makes it not a community. We can't go in the middle of the street and carry our cup of coffee and talk because it's only seconds and someone's speeding by. Marcia, a resident of a West Side neighborhood with a similar problem, was asked what she thought would create a stronger community. She laughed and said, quote, gates, big high brick walls and guards, end quote. Fear significantly dampens many residents' willingness to engage with others to lessen their exposure to criminality. Indeed, some pointed to the capacity of those engaged in wrongdoing to use fear to minimize community meddling. Recall Christy, the woman quoted at the beginning of this chapter, who was irritated by the loud antics and frequent visitors of her younger neighbors. Besides these ongoing practices, she said, her neighbors use scare tactics to protect himself. He intimidates by confronting those he believes lodge complaints with the police. As Christy summarized it, Christy, well, the community's afraid of him. Everybody's afraid of him. I'm afraid of him. But I'm not going to let him know that, because that is his leverage. He knows people are afraid of him. Interviewer, why are people afraid of him? Christy, because he's very aggressive and very angry, and he explodes at the littlest thing, verbally, all the time. He's always swearing at his mom. He punches holes in her front door. In the face of such intimidation, the sensible strategy, as Christie subsequently noted, would be to coalesce as a united front. As she put it, quote, if all of us went over there and talked to him and looked at him right in the face and said, quote, hey, we will not tolerate this anymore, end quote, it probably wouldn't happen so much. But happen it does. The paradox of fear, as with individualism, heterogeneity, and transience, is that it works its greatest damage on those neighborhoods that most need to overcome it. To expect a crime-ridden neighborhood to organize to increase security is to ask its residents to confront a fear that is often extremely well-founded. If fear indeed impedes community organizing, its effects are not evenly distributed. Once again, it becomes evident that the move to devolve political authority to community does not necessarily empower those neighborhoods who suffer the constraints imposed by economic disadvantage. And that brings us to a changing of the topic of this specific chapter that we're in. Give me 1 second. I want to check what our time is like. I think we're pretty close to the 30-minute mark. No, we're a little bit further apart from it. Okay, so the first thing that I think that stands out from all of those passages is the combination of individualism, heterogeneity, and transience and fear. The combination of individualism, heterogeneity, transience, and fear, and how those things manifest in neighborhoods to prevent neighborhoods from becoming communities, or to hinder neighborhoods or from becoming communities. I think that one of the other things that stands out is how those four things, fear, individualism, heterogeneity, and transience, are all things that will be manifested the most in lower class neighborhoods, in poor neighborhoods, in neighborhoods where they would be most benefited from from collectivism and from people not having fear. And so I think besides that, one of the other things that stands out as well is the importance of being able to articulate why certain neighborhoods exist with the type of continued crime or with the kind of continued violence that exists in them. I think a lot of times people just decide that if a certain neighborhood has shootings in it all the time, or has drug sales going on in it all the time, or have violent crimes in it all the time, or have police patrolling it heavily all the time, that it just means the people in that neighborhood don't care about each other. The people in that neighborhood don't care about these issues. When in fact, that's not the case. The case is that the people in these communities, the people in these neighborhoods don't have the collective power to overcome the fear, don't have the collective power to overcome the transience or the heterogeneity, and those things are not new. a lot of these neighborhoods and communities where there's a lot of violent crime, where there's a lot of heavy police activity, they've been that way for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And it has not always been the same families living there. It has not always been the same people with the same backgrounds living there. And at a certain point, it no longer becomes the fault of the individuals who are living in that neighborhood at the point in time when crime is continuing to persist and violence is continuing to persist. And it becomes the responsibility of the city that continues to have these circumstances that perpetrate crime and that perpetrate violent acts taking place. I think one of the things that's not necessarily talked about in this specific passage in this specific book, because it's not the overall emphasis or point of the book, is how routinely in American history there have been efforts to push crime into certain neighborhoods, into certain communities. There have been a concerted effort to devalue certain neighborhoods and devalue certain communities. I think the book, The Color of Law, is a book that would be very important for people to read, that goes through the de facto segregation and de jure segregation, that goes through redlining, that goes through how public housing was once for middle class for something that was for middle class citizens, and eventually when suburbs got created and black people and people of color were not able to help to work in the suburbs and to work to build the suburbs, which limited them from employment opportunities, and then B, they weren't able to move into the suburbs, which limited their the type of communities and the type of homes that they could have. That is when public housing, that's when public housing became something that people of color and black people were utilizing more often. And so I say all those things to say that the housing projects that we think of now were not always housing projects where people with poor incomes or lower class incomes lived in. That was something that happened through time when purposefully black people and people of color got relegated to being poor citizens and working class citizens and lower class citizens. These neighborhoods where crime is ridden in now, some of these neighborhoods 100 years ago weren't like that. It was when white flight began to take place that these neighborhoods were abandoned by the city and stopped being taken care of by the city. And so I think that is something that has to also be pointed out within here. The same thing, the idea of drug dealing, especially in some of the working class or a low class neighborhood, you can go and call the police on the person that's dealing drugs in one specific house that you may know of. That's not going to stop drug dealing in that neighborhood or drug dealing in that area. And that's something that has been noted historically, that you remove one drug dealer and another drug dealer takes the person's place. And so I just think that one of the other things that has to be talked about as we're talking about the hindrances in forming these communities being individualism, heterogeneity, transience, and fear is also how the government has played into that, to those things, how the community, appreciate it, man. Thank you. Have a good night. How the government has played into those things, how the institution of policing has played into those things, how racism, specifically how racism has played into those things. And I think that is one of the things that we have to anchor these conversations with. And that's one of the things that's important about cross-referencing. I think one of the things that's important about always regularly taking the time to read and to gain more information is the fact that you don't want to just be able to read through one of these things without any type of... wait, what's that? Would you like some cake? Yeah, we'll take it. We'll take it. And so that's one of the things, I want to point out, is that as we're reading through these things and as we're reading through some of these hindrances, to remember that it's reasons that these hindrances exist. It's reasons that these neighborhoods have violent crime and have some of these things happening in them. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you. Happy birthday. Whose birthday is it? Whoever's birthday, happy birthday. Okay. Have a good night. And so I think we'll end this episode here. We had about 30 minutes now, and I think just about 25 minutes, but we'll end this episode here. I think the main thing that I just want people to take away from reading this and from as we're going through this chapter is just to remember that there are causes for these effects that exist in these neighborhoods. There are causes for the reasons that these neighborhoods and locales have difficulties in forming communities. And then and my last thing, but even when we go back to why people are renting as opposed to owning homes, it's because of the lack of a livable wage that people get in this country. And that's something that has to be remembered as well. The reason that some of these, they pointed that out here, but the reason they pointed this out in the chapter as well, but the reason that people don't have time to maybe work in neighborhood watches or be part of a neighborhood watch or be part of cutting grass or keeping their yards up is because of the fact that some of these people have to work multiple jobs. And on top of some of them maybe working multiple jobs while dealing with multiple children, working multiple jobs, dealing with multiple children, and also maybe trying to go to school and get some type of higher education. And so these are so that way they can get to a place where they can own their own home. And so I think these are just all things that we have to take into consideration as we are reading through this chapter 2, the political status of community. And all of these things have political implications. So I just want to ask people to continue to listen and share these podcast episodes. Again, we put these episodes out daily to provide people an opportunity to begin on their journey to struggle against police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, and to further their journey to struggle against police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. Like the May 30th Alliance on Facebook, follow the May 30th Alliance on Twitter, follow the May 30th Alliance on Instagram, subscribe to the May 30th Alliance on YouTube, follow the May 30th Alliance on TikTok, and look out for tomorrow's episode.